Good evening, everybody. Hope you are all doing well. I'm live again as I am every Wednesday night, and I hope you get something out of this. I certainly enjoy it, and I haven't got a chance to actually meet a few people by email, which is kind of neat. And again, I hope you keep the questions coming. So let's go ahead and get started. Obviously, there's a lot going on. There was a confirmation hearing for the new commissioner of Social Security. It's not been voted on yet, but I think it's going to go through. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on with employees of federal agencies being terminated. They terminated a bunch of people at the CDC here in Atlanta, which, I don't know if that's such a good idea, but we'll see. We'll see what all comes out. But I'm sure you'll have questions about that. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Ron Kimbrough says, I was awarded Social Security disability in August, 51 years old, had them take out taxes. When you get to full retirement age, is the amount of money you get changed? No. Basically, Social Security disability and full retirement are about the same within a few dollars, and they'll convert you automatically, but it's pretty much going to be the same figure. So you won't see a drop or a increase. It'll just be pretty much the same. Jenny says hello, and Jenny sent me a couple of questions here. Jenny's one of my clients, and her case just got approved, so she had some questions about the amounts and all that stuff. And I just emailed her and I said, let's talk about this offline. I have not seen the paperwork yet. I'll just tell you that. But, I'm not going to go into Jenny's case for obvious reasons. And a workers' comp settlement, if you have a workers' comp settlement and it has this Hartman language in it that basically says that a small amount of money from that settlement is being allocated to reduce your Social Security, that will reduce it a very small amount of money. Usually it's $30, $40, $50 a month, not very much, but it's going to really depend on your expected lifespan. There are these actuarial tables that are used. It'll be in the workers' comp settlement, and then when all the paperwork is done, you'll get that figure. But generally speaking, it's not a ton of money. Obviously, it's better not to have $50 or $60 taken out, but obviously, if you have workers' comp, they'll do that. So it'll be a small amount of money, but we won't know that quite yet. Shub 281 called DDS today. They said everything except for the info from Hartford, my LTD company. Not sure why they would need anything from Hartford. In other words, if you have long-term disability, that is not an offset for Social Security. Generally speaking, when you have long-term disability, the insurance company benefits if you are approved for Social Security. They can reduce what they have to pay you, but it's not on the Social Security side. So as far as Social Security is concerned, you get the full payment. And the long-term disability company would reduce what they're paying you. The only reason Social Security might need to see something is if income is showing up under your earnings record, and they need proof this is not earnings, this is long-term disability payments, that may be what they're talking about. But otherwise, there's nothing else that really Social Security has to do with long-term disability at all. But it may be they just want to confirm that the money they're seeing in your earnings record is not earnings from work. Blue Z. I don't know what to think. My hearing was 5 weeks ago, still no word. Not unusual. I will tell you that sometimes I get decisions in 3 or 4 weeks. I've got a few that have been pending for 2 or 3 months. So I would tell you that, 2 months, 2.5 months is pretty typical. They have to have a writer put the decision together. This is not a reflection on your case. If it's taking longer, it doesn't mean it's a good news or bad news. It just means that the decision hasn't been put together. So I would just tell you have to just be patient. There's nothing you can really do about it because Social Security has a certain number of people that have to go through these decisions and write them. It has to go back to the judge. The judge has to review it and make sure it's appropriate and then release it. But 5 weeks, unfortunately, is not that unusual. Your attorney said after the hearing went well, and again, that's always a good sign. People sometimes ask me, do I know after a hearing whether we won or not? And the answer is sometimes. Sometimes you can tell by the questions that are being asked by the judge. Sometimes you can't. And if you have a good case, you know it. If you have a good case and a good judge, usually you can predict that's a pretty good sign. Um, I will tell you, after doing this for 30 something years, I've been surprised both ways. Sometimes I'll think a case went really well and I get an unfavorable decision. Other times I think the case did not go well at all, gets approved. So, but it's always a good sign if your attorney has a good feeling about it. So, that's helpful. One thing I would tell you, it's not a bad idea to do this. Ask your attorney to get you a copy of the actual hearing recording. You can listen to the hearing, and when you listen to it, many times there'll be things that come up you don't remember because you're in the moment. And if you listen to the hearing, you may find there's some things that went better than you thought, or just some things that just would be interesting to know. So I encourage my clients, if they want to, let me get a copy of the written, or the not the oral, but the verbal, the audio recording of the hearing, and listen to it. It's actually very interesting. And when I take a case from somebody else that has been denied and we look to appeal it, I'll always get the audio recording and listen to it because, it's very hard to remember when you're in the middle of this exactly what happened. And even in cases if I'm appealing, I might listen to it because, if the judge, many times the grounds for appeal would be a judge made a mistake in the hypothetical question, did not include something or misstated it. And again, if you listen to the hearing recording, you will get that. And if I think a case did not go well, or if I have a low paid judge, I'll get that immediately just because I want to have it. But hopefully it went well for you and that you'll get a good decision. Elizabeth says, you made it. Welcome, Elizabeth. I'm glad you are here. Sarah D. Is 39 years old, have chronic anemia and diabetes, possibly another autoimmune condition, past year struggle with cycling, insomnia, long periods of sleep, now on 2 sleep medications. One has black box warning, makes me extremely groggy and sleepy all morning. How likely to be found disabled with sleep medicine side effects? I will be seeing my doctor tomorrow to discuss side effects. Sarah, my take on it is, the first thing that jumps out at me is your age. Obviously, at 39, it's more difficult to win than if you were 59. On the other hand, the type of issues you've got, severe medication side effects, if they're well documented, would really make it difficult for anybody to, have consistent work attendance. And then you've got, other things, the anemia, which is going to make you weak, and the diabetes, which has issues. You didn't say if you're insulin dependent or not, but diabetes is always going to have some issues there. Insomnia, they call it non-restorative sleep. So all these things are, what I would call non-exertional, in the sense that it doesn't affect necessarily your physical, how much you can lift or carry, but it does affect you in terms of focus and concentration. And in those cases, the age of the claimant is a little bit less important. So, if all that is documented, that looks pretty good to me. Now, I will tell you, that being said, there are judges out there who, if they see anybody under 50, their first inclination is deny it. And you got to move the mountain to prove that you are in fact disabled. So a lot of this is going to depend on what kind of judge you get and how sympathetic the judge is, how open the judge would be to approving a case for somebody under age 50. But I think medically, if all the things you're talking about are well documented, your doctor would complete a functional capacity evaluation and talk about the side effects of the medications, maybe even have a vocational evaluation that talks about the effect it would have on reliability. I think that medically, if it wasn't for this sort of implicit bias against people under 50, you have a good case. The question is, can you get a judge that would overlook the age factor? And obviously, in the Social Security world, there is a real focus, not just Social Security, but the government in general. There is a focus on saving money, and what's one of the easiest places to save money is the disability program, where it's whether you win or lose is up to the discretion of a judge. And if you put pressure on judges to only approve people over 50 or over 55 or nobody for that matter, it's really hard to combat that. I mean, I had a hearing last week with a judge with a good case. My client, I think, is disabled. The judge has a 12% approval rate, and she may deny this case, probably will. One of my colleagues commented that my colleague had been appearing before this judge for 20 years and had never gotten a favorable decision. This is a case that 85, 90% of judges I appear would approve. What this judge may not, so I'm going to have to appeal it. So again, a lot of this is going to depend on the judge. But Sarah, based on what you're telling me, I think you would meet the standard of disability, which is the inability to be a reliable employee, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Michael Jennings, are you familiar with the process for work opportunity tax credit? No, I do not know anything about that, so I would not be the right person to ask about that. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with that at all, so I don't like to dabble and guess. So I'm not going to say. Again, anything about the work opportunity tax credit, I don't know anything about it. So, it's just not something that I want to comment on because I don't want to give you bad information. I don't know. And that's one thing, by the way, that I've learned over the years. If you don't know something, say, I don't know. I think lawyers in particular get in trouble when they try to BS their way out of, something they don't know and, give bad information. So if I don't know something, I'm going to tell you I don't know it. Rodney. Hello, Rodney. Rodney is one of my regulars, former client of my firm. Good to see you. Trish Wade is a regular here. Good to see you, Trish. Paul Parker, I've seen him before as well. Why does Social Security, DDS, or Disability Determination Services send your recon case or recon's paperwork to another state after 18 months at stage 2, now at stage 3, non-medical in another state? Okay. First of all, I want to reiterate, when you go to your My Social Security account and you see stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, that doesn't mean anything. That's just, it's simply a way for them to, make you think that your case is progressing. There's no such thing as officially stage 1 or stage 2 of a recon evaluation. I mean, they may have internal stages, but it doesn't mean anything because a case could be in quote unquote stage 3 for 6 months or 6 days. So that doesn't really mean anything. It's just, you get a chance to see if something's moving. A more accurate way to know is like when I'm looking at a case, I can log into somebody's electronic folder. I can see, is there activity on the file? Is the DDS evaluator, examiner, case manager requesting medical records, doing things, sending letters out, so you can see if stuff's going on. But that one, stage 1, 2, 3 doesn't mean anything. As far as why they're sending it out, it's because of staffing. They don't have enough people. And, as you saw, they've offered a buyout to a lot of people. Many have taken it. So you have some states where they don't have enough people. So when that happens, they, obviously they have computer systems that tell them where there's some capacity. Let's say if you're in California or Texas and there's capacity in Montana or Iowa, they'll send it out there. It doesn't really matter. I mean, the standard's the same, but they're just doing it to move it along. And I see this at the hearing stage where a case will be sent to a judge. In fact, this case I was just telling you about with this judge with very low approval rate, different state for my client. This judge was in South Carolina. My client's in Massachusetts. One of the things we talked about was, should I request when the judge says, do you agree to a telephone hearing? I said we could have the option of saying no, and they would have potentially stopped the hearing and schedule it for a live hearing. The problem is the judge could always appear by video. So I just felt like, if we requested a live hearing, we may end up with the same judge and we'd have to wait another year for that. And then the problem, of course, would be I don't want to fly into Boston, although I've never been there, for one hearing before a judge who's, has a very low approval rate. So we just decided to go forward with it. We'll deal with our appeal if we need to. But the quick answer to Paul is it's just staffing and it's capacity. And they're just trying to get it to somebody who can review it. Jen, my paralegal from Lincoln, Nebraska, is here with us tonight. Good afternoon, Jen. Jen, I've been kind of ignoring Jen lately. I've got a bunch of hearings coming up. And so I sort of said, for the next few days, just, I really can't be focusing on anything other than hearing prep. I have like 4 hearings on Monday. I got 2 tomorrow, 2 on Friday, and I'm ready for them, but I've just been working like a dog, getting ready for them. But so Jen, I'm sorry that I've been kind of not responding to you other than very cryptically, because I'm just, as you see my calendar, pretty busy. Okay. Johnny Doster, good evening. Haven't been on? Yes, you have not been, Johnny. I know we saw you a few months ago, and I'm glad to see you here back. I hope things are going well with you. Afsena, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Good evening. Good evening to you. Lulu went for a mental evaluation with a Social Security doctor. It lasted 15 minutes. Um, that's a very good question. I mean, the cynical answer would be that Social Security does not pay consultative evaluators very much money. They pay them, $100, $75, $125. And, it's possible that the examiner either saw there was, decided there was nothing there was no mental health issues at all, or there were severe mental health issues that, were beyond the scope of what she was going to be testing for. And she simply said, this is beyond the scope of what I'm testing for. You need a neuropsych evaluation or you need something else. But I would say that what I would do in a situation like this is try to get a copy of the report that this doctor said, created for this after this 15-minute consultative. Look what it says. If it says a bunch of stuff in there that did not happen, I ran this test where I asked the claimant to spell these words backwards, all the things they typically do in the psych consults, and annotate it, make notes, and if the result of the report is not in your favor, should you get to a hearing, object to it. Again, that's what I've had clients in the hearings where they tell me, I saw this doctor. Usually it's physical, and I saw this doctor, and literally he didn't touch me, didn't take my reflexes. He walked out after 10 minutes because he got a phone call. Then I got this 5-page report talking about the things he did, didn't do any of it. So you can certainly object to that. But of course, see what it says. Maybe it's helpful because, again, maybe the problem is so obvious that the doctor has simply said, this person clearly is listing level with mental health or clearly has these problems or needs a neuropsych evaluation or a neurological evaluation. And therefore, I can't do anything. So, but it's important to get a copy of the file. And I think just in general, I would tell everybody, when you can, get a copy of your exhibit file. Nowadays, most attorneys use services where it will take the exhibit file and combine it into one PDF. In fact, you can go into the ERE, the Electronic Records Express, which is what's the Social Security site, and download your file as one PDF. And that way you can search it. You can review it and see what's there. But, there are other services that provide a little more, a little easier to use type of PDF. But, ask your attorney to get you a copy of it. In fact, one of the things that we do is, there's a table of contents, as it were, of Section F, which is the medical part of your file. And so when we are doing our case prep, hearing prep, I will send, or Jen or somebody will send the Section F table of contents to our client and say, hey, take a look at this. Is there anything missing? Have you gone to these doctors anymore? That's kind of the starting point. But it's always a good idea to have a copy of your entire medical file. And now, if you can have it all as one PDF, it's easy to store, doesn't take up a lot of space, and you should have it because if you get approved, you may need it down the road for a continuing review, or you may need it for a doctor. One of the things that's very common that we see is doctors' offices go out of business. The doctor retires, sells his practice or her practice. Any number of things can happen, and those records become unavailable. And so if you are able to get a copy of your records and keep that as part of your quote unquote permanent file on your computer or in a file cabinet or something like that, put it on a thumb drive, that's really not a bad thing to do. It's a really good idea to do that. So I would encourage people to do that. But, I'm getting a little beyond the scope of your question, but the answer is it could be for a legitimate reason, or it could be that the doctor is just trying to make $100 or $150, whatever, without doing any work. And that may end up hurting your case. So you want to take a close look at it. Okay. DLO, my question is more about after Social Security disability is approved. Well, that's a good thing. Hopefully it was approved. Why has Medicare gotten so bad? I'm AARP with Medicare versus United Healthcare, and I keep getting told by the reps that I'm on the best plan, but $185 premium is garnished a month plus $54 for dental rider, but then I'm also paying 20 to 30 copays, $200 for initial consults. What gives? This is a topic that I was last week. If you were here, Stephanie Joy and I were chatting, and we both mentioned we've been on a call earlier that day with a woman who does a lot of Medicare consulting. And Medicare can get really, really confusing. It's beyond what I do, but you have Medicare Advantage plans, which many people think are not a good idea. Then you have the Medicare supplement plans, which can be a good idea. I think what I would tell you, Delo, is you need to look. You need to learn more about all this. You need to learn about the Medicare options and what the costs would be, because there's no the one thing I got from this is no one size fits all. And I think that, unfortunately, a lot of the people you talk to about Medicare, have a vested interest. They're trying to sell you something, either a, Medicare Advantage plan or a supplement plan. There's a gentleman that I know named Cal Hero, who I think is an honorable, honest guy. And he would be, I'm sure, happy to talk to you about it. Again, use your own due diligence. But, his website's called MedicareMall.com. And I know he sells both Medicare Advantage and Medicare supplement plans. Might be worth talking to him. But again, keep in mind that, you have got to do what's best for you. But I think, I wouldn't accept the first plan proposed to you, and just see what makes the most sense, given your particular situation. But you're not the first person who's told me that the cost of Medicare versus the benefit you derive from it is getting a little bit out of sync. But that's really beyond what I do. I know there are people who deal with it or Medicare consultants. It's probably worth ideally finding somebody who does that on a fee basis, so there's no dog in the fight, as it were. But absent that, somebody like Cal, I'm sure, would be able to give you some information, at least fill in part of the puzzle. I think you want to talk to a bunch of people and try to get a consensus about that. But I don't deal with Medicare per se, because that's just not my area. I'm worried about getting people on disability, but I have heard that Medicare can be a challenge. Jim says, I've moved to Hawaii, where I'm originally from. Will that hurt me or be difficult to accomplish? Social Security disability is, federal. It's not state run. Now, different, if you look at the judges' approval rates in Hawaii versus the state you're in, you may see a little bit of a difference. But again, it comes down to individual judges. I had a judge in South Carolina who has an abysmal approval rate. I've got a hearing with another judge, in South Carolina, the same hearing office, with a great approval rate. So it's going to depend on the judge. But I don't think it's going to hurt you to go to Hawaii in terms of if they say, why did you move there? I had family there, I needed help with whatever. I didn't want to deal with the cold winters, whatever the case may be, but it won't hurt you. There's no penalty for moving to different states, other than I know some states have their own state disability programs, like I know California does, I think New Jersey might. And so Hawaii doesn't have it, I don't think. So that could be a factor. But overall, moving to different states not going to make any difference. Vince is in Michigan. Crazy weather in the Great Lakes states, snow, freezing rain, followed by heavy rain all day, no tornadoes. Vince, I feel your pain. Man, it was like 82 degrees and mild here in Atlanta. So, you made the decision to live in Michigan, buddy. That's your choice. I would not do it. I will be in Michigan this summer for a wedding, Traverse City, Michigan, in July for a wedding. A good friend of mine's daughter is getting married there. So I've never been to Michigan, but I will be there in the summertime, where it's not going to be freezing, presumably. I've heard it's beautiful. In fact, I know a couple of people. One of the attorneys in my office, works with my wife. He's from Michigan. One of my good friends, tennis buddies, is from Michigan, and they both say during the summertime, maybe late spring, early fall, it's really, really nice. So I'm looking forward to going. I've never been. I have Madeline at my office as well. Good to see you. I got Jen and Madeline here. Good to see both of you. And Madeline, as I was saying before, I've been sort of under the radar because I got all these hearings coming up. But I know you sent me a couple of questions. I think I answered one or two of them, but I'll get to those when I come up for air. But good to see you. MT. They said, I'm assuming you said, Secretary said the adjudicator was in final review of going over my medical records and then a decision be made. And months ago, still no decision. My attorney said no decision yet. Yeah, one of the things now that Social Security does is they give us access to different computer utilities that will tell us where the case is. There's one I use called Chronicle, for example, that will tell me when a decision has been made. Um, so, Social Security, terribly understaffed. They've lost a bunch of people, so things are going to slow down. I mean, I'm just going to tell you, things will slow down. What we have decided, in our practice is to get things as ready as we can have them, and as soon as decisions are issued, get that appeal filed right away. Get the adjudicators what they need right away. Is it going to slow down for an extra month or two, or 6 months, or a year? We don't know. So far, not really too terribly much. I mean, the biggest issue I've run into so far is getting people on the phone. You can't get them on the phone anymore, but they do respond to faxes and letters. But there's going to be a degradation of customer service. How much of it, I don't know. We've got a couple of cases that we had to file paper appeals on because there's any number of reasons why you can't do it electronically. And the problem when you do a paper appeal is it doesn't get into their system right away. And so, my client would call up Social Security and say, "What's the status of my case?" Well, your case was dismissed. Well, no, it wasn't, but that's what they think. And then, it can get to be a bit of a mess. So, it's just sometimes paper appeals, are really not good. But things are just taking a while, and we just have to be patient because there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have to be patient. There's nothing we can do about it. Michelle, my husband had one knee replaced 2 years ago. The doctor confirmed his needs had the other one replaced. With just that, was likely of being approved with that 57-year-old. I think it's going to really depend. Well, the short answer is it depends on how the function of his knees. I mean, if he had the knee replacement, the one knee a couple of years ago, and his knee is fine and he's able to use it, that works against being found disabled. He's got another one that needs to be replaced. If you have a need for knee replacement, my first thing I would think of would be Grid Rule 202.06, which is, and the grid rules are basically a way to get approved more quickly if you're over 50 or over 55. So Grid Rule 202.06 says, even if you can do light work is standing 6 hours a day, lifting up to 20 pounds, you are still disabled. And the only way to get past that would be to show you could do medium work, and medium work is lifting up to 50 pounds. Well, clearly a person who needs a knee replacement is not going to be lifting 50 pounds. So you meet that part of it. The other question is, would he have transferable skills? If he had a job where it could be transferred, where he could do it sitting down. But again, the problem there is, A, can he even stand for 2 hours, or B, can he sit for 6? And the second thing would be, is his pain such that any skills he may have acquired would not transfer very readily? So I would tell you that before that knee is replaced, it sounds disabling. And realize you have to be out, you have to have a condition that keeps you out of work for a year. So if, let's say, he's been working up until, end of February, let's just say, then he files for disability and he gets that other knee replaced within the next year and he's okay, then he would be maybe meet the standard for disability for 5 or 6 months, but he wouldn't meet the year and he wouldn't win. If he has been, at a knee replacement level and not working for a year or longer, at a minimum, he could go for a closed period. And obviously, if he holds off on getting that knee replaced, he would be eligible for ongoing disability. I wouldn't tell somebody not to get your knee replaced so you can get on disability, because I think you'll make more money and be happier to be off of disability. But, if he's going for a closed period while he gets the knee fixed and you've got at least a year into it, it's a pretty good case. So the bottom line is, a person who is at knee replacement level, I think, has a really good chance of meeting the grids. I think you even have a chance of arguing that your functional capacity is so reduced by physical limitations, the bad knee, and pain that interferes with attention, concentration, focus. You got a pretty good argument there. The real question would be, if he has not been out of work for a year, and if he gets the knee fixed before the end of that being out for a year, that would take him out of the disability system. But if he's out for a year with knee problems at this level, I think he at least has a closed period. MT basically was the person who said that was in the final review. Now MT is coming in a hold of the senator. Good idea. now working at finding out. And I will tell you, I've got a bunch of cases that I'm trying now, and I see, and I tell my clients many times, contact your senator. I see congressional inquiry in there. And these cases are coming up for hearing pretty quickly. So I think that's that's a pretty good sign. So I would think that's going to get things moving. If one does move, so this is Jim who's going to move to Hawaii, how would you handle talking to your new physicians? Again, I would try to get a copy of your medical records from your current physicians and bring it with you to Hawaii. And when you establish new treatment, give these records to your doctor so the doctor has what they call a longitudinal history of your medical situation. And yeah, it's going to take some adjustment, to get a new doctor, find somebody that you like that is sort of the same mindset as your current doctors, assuming you like them. But yeah, it's part of the process. And I will tell you as well, it can be difficult to get a new doctor. I mean, many doctors, are limited as far as what insurance they will take. And I've had people tell me that, the process of trying to get a new doctor, especially if you're on limited insurance, can be daunting. So might even be worth making a few phone calls to doctors in Hawaii that are the same specialty what you've got, or ask your doctor locally, do you know anybody in Hawaii, or do you have a resource that would give me some names? Make some phone calls and get a sense of whether you'd be able to get into that practice and get treated. Do this before you move, because if you find that you simply cannot get medical care, that might impact your decision of whether to move or not. Shouldn't, but it could, and that can be really important for your health. Forget the Social Security case, but for your health. Wayne Quarter says, after applying for SSDI at 53, after working 32 years, MRI says severe cervical stenosis at C47 with surgeon visits, develop epidurals. Is there a chance? ... 53. Yeah, I mean, again, at 53, to meet the grid rule, you've got to be limited to sedentary work. If you are 55, really, really strong case. But at 53, it's still pretty strong, great work record. That really helps. Severe stenosis, you don't see if there's any disc bulging or herniations or nerve root impact. Epidurals have been failed. Are you a surgical candidate? My thought would be, if you're a surgical candidate, epidurals have failed, other conservative treatment has failed, MRI is supportive, you're 53. I think that, you certainly have a pretty good argument under the grids that you wouldn't be able to lift 10 pounds on a regular basis. But, again, you may need to get some medical support for that. The other thing you got to be careful about, if you apply today, by the time your case comes up for a hearing, if it got that far, you'll be 55. And I've seen judges decide, well, we're going to go ahead just and approve you, but at age 55, which means, no past due benefits. So, does it make more sense to try to keep working longer through this and delay this, knowing that if you get approved after age 55, that they may change the onset date? So a lot of things to think about, but strategically, that would be my worry, is that you get approved, but as of your 55th birthday. So when somebody's 53 or 54, that has to come into play. It shouldn't. You're either disabled or you're not, but, again, you don't mention disc herniations or nerve root, compression, things like that. But, you've got a lot there, but is it enough? Again, if you're over 55, I think clearly it would be. Between 50 and 55, maybe. But like I said, I'm running into these situations where, judges are approving people at 55 as opposed to, 53. Lulu, see, doctor, very polite, didn't interrupt me, but kept interrupting, didn't want to hear, less than 12 minutes. Yeah, I think you'd asked before. Again, I would look at the report, see what that has to say. Afsana says, SSI claim my recon was submitted late. Yes, sent a good cause statement, good move on your part. And basically what that means is that when you get a decision, initial denial, let's say it's got a date of January 17th, 2025, you have 60 days plus 5 days for mailing, or January 17th plus 65 days to get the recon in their office. In theory, if it's postmarked, but it really needs to be there. let's say you miss it by a day or a week. Usually, if you submit a good cause statement saying that because of severe pain, you couldn't drive, you had a difficult time understanding what to do, how to fill it out. Normally, if it's with even with a month or two, they'll go ahead and accept it late, and you use Form SSA 795 to do this. Um, but you won't know. But I think many times they will. If it's just a few days late, it shouldn't be a problem. And again, I get back to the step 2 of 5. Doesn't really mean anything. It's just when they decide they're going to make a decision on your request, they'll do that. What should I do? Should I plan to hire a lawyer? Again, whether the lawyer is probably not going to be able to do anything at this point other than to look to see what you wrote on your good cause, maybe resubmit another one if it didn't say what the lawyer wanted it to say. Um, if you've already got the recon filed, you've already submitted the good cause, my gut would say just wait and see what happens. I mean, you're probably not going to get approved at recon, but if you do and you hire a lawyer, you're going to give up 25% of your past due benefits. With the lawyer probably not having done a whole heck of a lot. Now you could certainly ask the lawyer, reach an agreement that if you can, I will agree to pay X if it gets approved at recon. Some lawyers won't mess with that, some will, but I can't tell you not to get a lawyer because I think there's always value in doing so. At this point where you're at, maybe you wait and see what happens. But that's just going to be a judgment call on your part. Maybe to start talking to people though, and get somebody lined up so that you're ready when you do. All right, Deb Lindley is responding to Sarah D. This is the person who had all the non-exertional impairments, the insomnia, the sleep medications that cause all kind of problems. And she raises a good point. Keep a sleep log. I talked about do you have non-restorative sleep, which means that you wake up, you don't feel rested at all. You can't focus and concentrate. I think what Deb is suggesting makes a lot of sense. Keep a sleep log. So, if you're asked to look at your sleeping habits from a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, if you get to a hearing, you have the sleep log, you can say, well, I put all this into a spreadsheet, and here's the graph that shows that 83% of the time, I did not have a good night's sleep. And 10% of the time I got less than 2 hours of sleep, or whatever you put on your log. But I think that's not a bad idea to do that. And a sleep study, of course, would be more used for things like sleep apnea, but that might be something as well to get some documentation about the problems you're having with sleep. I will tell you, however, that sleep apnea is not going to generally win a disability case. Sleep apnea or non-restorative sleep will maybe take you out of skilled or semi-skilled work and make it unskilled, but it's probably not going to be enough to win your case. I agree with the sleep log. I'm not sure about the sleep study because they can be expensive, but a sleep log would certainly make a lot of sense. Thunder, good evening. How are you doing? Blaine Bates says, I'm 62, diagnosed with severe to extreme spinal stenosis. A doctor placed medical restrictions on me. Employers said they cannot meet the restrictions. PMR, let me find the rest of it here. I assume that's some sort of, I'm not sure what PMR stands for, maybe some sort of medical restrictions. I have a letter from employer saying I was let go to medical restrictions. What are my chances? Blaine, I think it's 62 with severe stenosis. That just says grid rule all over it. In fact, there is something in addition to the grid rule called the POMS, POMS, which basically says that as of age 55, if you're limited to sedentary or light work, I'm sorry, at age 60, if you're limited to light work, which is the grid 202.06, Social Security have to prove you have to make a minimum vocational adjustment for them to find a job for you. So at age 60, light work, the minimum vocational adjustment standard applies for transferable skills analysis. Very hard to meet that because obviously you left your last job because you couldn't do it. At 55, if you're limited to sedentary, that minimum vocational adjustment standard applies. So it's kind of like the grid rule on steroids is maybe another way to put it. But at 62 with what you've got, I think it's a winning case. I haven't looked at the record, but based on what you're telling me, I think it looks pretty strong. J. Rose or Jerose, maybe Abbott. Got my Social Security disability at 56, now 62, received a 1099 of from $1,700 income. No, because that is not earned income from a job. That sounds like a dividend or something passive. Plus $1,700 is, it's 1 month of SGA. So again, if that's spread over the course of a year, that's well less than SGA. So I don't, and if you haven't used a trial work period, even if they decided that $1,700 represents work, it's one trial work period month. You have 9 of them. It will not hurt you, is the bottom line. Shub says all cases go before a judge. State 54 osteoarthritis of both knees, well documented, but in short-term, long-term for 2 years. No, not every case goes before a judge. I had a hearing 2 weeks ago, scheduled, day before, and I wrote a brief. I typically write briefs on all my cases. The judge called up and said, I looked at the brief. I'm going to go ahead and approve it on the record. You don't need to go to the hearing. Great. I got the written decision yesterday. Case is approved. So not every case goes to a hearing. Some cases get approved at initial and recon. Jenny, who was here earlier, I may still be here, her case got approved at recon. So it does happen. So, if you've got really, really solid medical evidence and you submit it, they've got it. They very well may approve you without a hearing. I tell people, assume you're going to go to a hearing, assume it's going to be 2 years, but, a decent percentage of people get approved earlier. So that's ideal if we can make it happen. Jackie's husband is 57, 100% permanent total disabled vet, warehouse worker for 27 years, spinal stenosis, degenerative disc disease, herniated disc, bulging disc, where FMLA paperwork helps claim. It won't hurt it. It's just another piece of the puzzle. That's just a decision that he made to take some time off. You could argue this reflects reliability, that a person took off FMLA because he needed some time to recover. It's not going to move the meter that much. I mean, it won't hurt, may help a little bit, but it's not going to change. It's not as important as an MRI showing a severely herniated disc. It's just, FMLA or handicap placard just says that there's just one more step in it. If the doctor signed the FMLA, I assume doctor signed the FMLA paperwork, and maybe there's something in there where the doctor said that, that your husband has some work capacity limitations, that can help. But FMLA is not determinative. It's not binding on Social Security, but it certainly does not hurt you. It will maybe help a little bit. Jose, GI Jose, Joe, hello. When initial recons are approved, how long does it take to be notified for approval? Denials happen in 24 hours when they call to confirm banking information. When they approve you, again, the process of getting approved at initial recon might take 6, 8, 10 months. So that's not very quickly. If they approve you, they send you a letter, or actually, like in Jenny's case, they put money in her account. That's how she knew. And then there was something online in her My Social Security statement that told her that she was approved. So normally you get a written decision, within a week or two after the decision that's been made. The money may show up before then. If they don't have your bank information, they'll I say call. They don't like to call because that's one of the areas there's been a lot of fraud that the Doge folks are going after. So they may make you come in person. They may put you through some sort of testing to make sure you say you are, so that anybody can't just call up Social Security and say, hey, I'm Joe's brother, and the money needs to go to me, or something like that. So I would be careful about how you get that to them, but you will want to get them your banking information. How they request it now may be changing. Jackie, he had degenerative disc disease. Okay, that was the person before, who was asking about her husband. And degenerative disc disease is, severe arthritis. It's not the same as a herniated disc or, something like that. So degenerative disc disease, everybody has it when you're 57. The question is, how severe is it? You don't win based on a diagnosis. You win based on the functional impact of that diagnosis. Dennis says, I'm glad I'm 57. Can't wait to get regular at 62. 4.5 years to go. You know, I mean, when you say you want to get Social Security at 62, you're giving the government a 25% discount. If you can avoid that, I would avoid it. I mean, you obviously working in general, you'll make more money, you'll be happier, you'll have control of your life. Taking retirement, early retirement at 62, how much are you going to get? Look at your My Social Security statement. Is it really worth, having such a small amount of money to live on? Maybe it is, but that's something you want to really know. Dakota girls from South Dakota. I see the little symbol. So you are now officially the only person I've ever virtually met from South Dakota. So how are you doing? I hope the weather in South Dakota is better than it is in Michigan, where Vince is. So Deb says, good luck with my hearings. Yes. No, look, I enjoy this, and I worked all day, did a bunch of briefs, got them drafted. So you sort of hit a burnout point where you got to just stop. I mean, in fact, after I finished, I probably broke off around 6:15. My wife came home. We took the dog for a 4-mile walk. Came back, had a little dinner. Now I'm doing this. There's only so much you can do productively when you're doing briefing, because it's very labor intensive. You got to go through these medical records, and so I'm not as sharp at 7 o'clock at night as it would be at 8 in the morning. So I usually kind of, I have enough time to get these ready. So I'm not going to work when I'm really, really mentally tired. Alicia. Okay. How you doing, Alicia? I know we have some strange stuff going on in your case, but good to see you here. Dennis Pedretti says people are getting the website is crashing. I've heard that the website is crashing at times. So be careful. Okay. What happens when your lawyer retires and doesn't tell you? That's not a very good thing to do. Trying to get your paperwork back, and he has it in boxes. I would say, realize a lot of that paperwork is going to be on file with Social Security. So, if you're in the middle of a disability case, you get another attorney. Attorney can log in and get copies of all that paperwork. Now, your current attorney will need to withdraw and waive fees, so a new attorney can take over. And by retiring doesn't mean he's waiving fees, so you need to try to get him to do that. But yeah, I think I would ask the attorney to provide you a copy of your paperwork. He should have told you, but again, now that you just want to get your file and kind of move on. You have something else here. Yeah, he wrote a letter to the state bar. Yeah, I mean, again, maybe he had his reasons. I don't know. Maybe he was sick or your family member was sick. But yeah, you don't just sort of close up shop and not tell anybody, your clients. That's not good. But again, before assuming the worst, it could be just something he had some serious medical problem. That can happen too. Connie Sibley's turning 62, needed to suffer his term by retirement at 62. Currently receiving widow's support. This is a numbers game. How much will you get from early retirement? Can you get your deceased husband's Social Security money? What is the biggest number? And it's hard to find people who really know. I mean, elder law attorneys typically deal with this kind of thing, but you need to do kind of a numbers analysis to see where you get the largest bang for your buck. This is not something that I do, by the way. Social Security disability attorneys aren't going to be able to do retirement analysis, but I know that there are people who do it. And like I said, elder law attorneys can do this, but you need to really take a look at it and get a sense of what's going to make the most sense for you. Tara Upshaw says, good evening. Hello, Tara. How are you doing? Aaron, thanks for coming. Yes, very good, Aaron. Pretty nervous. We're going to be just fine. You have as we talked about, you got a really good case. I think we're going to win. And, obviously, I think we have a good judge. Never can say 100%, but you've got a good case. I'm very comfortable, very confident we're going to win. I'm glad you're here tonight, and get a good night's sleep. We're going to do just fine tomorrow. Are we tomorrow? I got to check. Are we tomorrow or Friday? I lose track. I've got 4 coming up. And let's see. I'm thinking about it. No, you are Friday. That's right. You are Friday. I don't know why I had just. you're Friday. Like I said, I'm ready. I have 2 tomorrow and 2. I had submitted 4 briefs earlier this week, and so you were Friday. So yes, I will be ready Friday. I hope it didn't freak you out when I said tomorrow, Friday. We're good. We're good. We're good here. Okay. Okay. Now this is a little different. He took $6,000 after he retired. Never saw him again. Forgot my paperwork back. Against the law, sent a letter. That's a little weird. I mean, what would he take $6,000 from? Now, did you win your case? I don't know, but you got to find out what's going on. But you filed a bar complaint. That usually gets the attention of a lawyer if they've done something wrong. By the way, this is something that I will tell you. People sometimes say to me, I'm going to file a bar complaint against that lawyer because I'm not happy with him. Bar complaints are really should be reserved for something really serious, an ethical issue. Again, if an attorney took a $6,000 retainer, didn't do anything and retired, that's an ethical issue. Maybe more than that, maybe criminal. But that's something. If somebody, I don't know, took on a classic example would be, somebody retains you, and then it turns out they had previously represented your ex-wife, or an ex-business partner, where there's a conflict of interest, something like that. Because you're unhappy with the results of a case doesn't mean your attorney did something ethically wrong. Because your attorney, fired you, wasn't getting along with you, that's not an ethical problem. People seem to think, well, I'm just going to report them to the bar, and that's going to be my recourse. You're messing with somebody's livelihood. So I would say, I can't tell you, very rarely do I tell somebody, contact the state bar. I think the first thing you want to do is contact the lawyer, try to get his or her side of the story, try to work it out. There are ethical violations, but it's not something to be thrown around lightly. And I think people sometimes think, well, I'm just going to file a bar complaint, and because I'm unhappy. And I'll tell you, the bar, by the way, they don't pursue those, because if somebody files a bar complaint and says, I'm unhappy because my lawyer lost my case, the state bar is going to say that's not an ethical problem. But don't mess with people. That's my feeling. But again, if you took $6,000 to do work, whatever that work may be, estate planning or contract drafting or whatever it may be, criminal, and didn't do anything and didn't refund your money, yeah, then I think that may be a bar issue. Blue Z, after you've had your hearing with the judge, they want you to go to be evaluated with their doctors. Yes, a judge can schedule a post-hearing consultative evaluation. The judge can send your records out for what they call post-hearing interrogatories with a medical expert. They can do it until that decision is issued. Your case is open. They can schedule another hearing. They can do whatever they want to do. And sometimes it does happen. Not a lot, but it does happen sometimes. Dakota Girl, thank you for helping. Look for an attorney. Would you be able to listen to me? Let me know. Again, what you're talking about, I mean, if you've got a disability case, send me, you see on the crawl there, contact me using that link. I'm happy to talk to you about a potential disability case. I don't want to get involved in a contract dispute with some other lawyer. Again, the $6,000 doesn't make any sense unless it was a CDR. Again, I'm happy to talk to anybody. If it's something I can help with, I'll look at it. If it's something that's beyond what I do, I'll tell you that as well. That's the best I can do without knowing more about your case. How far do they go back for back pay? You can get back pay 1 year prior to the date of your application for benefits. So if you applied in February of 25, you can get paid at most from February of 24. The 5-month waiting period could run long before that, but assuming the 5-month waiting period is run and it's a disability case, you get paid 1 year prior to the date of application. Not the date of decision, date of application. And I think Deb is referring to Connie about the survivor benefit. And again, she talked about the delayed retirement credit. So there's a lot of factors that go into play here. A lot of factors as to when you should collect and what account you should collect off of. So you got to do your research and your due diligence on that. Thomas, 62 years old, out of work 13 weeks. Pensioner of a sciatica, dragging my right leg, no insurance, no Medicaid for single men. Well, again, Tommy, I would tell you at 62, that certainly helps if you're going to pursue disability. You've only been out of work for a couple of months, not even 3 months. Or actually 3 months and 1 week. It's not quite 4 months. So, the question is, you're not really getting any kind of treatment. Have you had an MRI? if you don't get treatment and it's not going to get better, you may be out of work for a year. Obviously, a better thing would be to get treatment and get yourself fixed. You can go back to work, but if you decided to apply, you could do that. You would have to allege you're likely to be out of work for a year. By the time your case got to a hearing, a year would have gone by. And if your condition is the same as it is now, you're dragging your foot, you're in terrible pain, the grid rules would apply. So I think it's potentially a winning case down the road if you decide to go that way. But, I think you have to hit that year mark. And the bigger thing is, if you can get treatment, some way to get treatment, that would be very helpful, because the longer you go with nerve damage, the more difficult it's going to be to get it fixed, because nerves die. And, you don't want to have, I don't care if you get on Social Security or not, that's not, the money is not the factor. The factor is you're going to be walking with a dragged foot the rest of your life. So Social Security to me is a secondary concern. And more importantly, can you get yourself to a doctor who will see you and treat you? And that, there may be some sort of a low cost, no cost hospital system near where you live. And that may be what you have to do. But I would tell you to do that, because when you're telling me you've got a foot drag, that's pretty serious. Don't want to go on too long with that. Okay, attorney waiting for denial from the I think you mean the appeals council. Wonder if I should start a new case since cognitive issues are deteriorating. Well, if you've got your case to the appeals council, you can't start a new case. You can only pursue an appeal or a new case. You can't do both. Once it gets to district court, if you got that far, you could. But you might talk to your attorney about this, but I don't think you can file a new case right now, because it's still at the appeals council. Goddess of Love divinely sings. Okay. What do you do if the doctor fails to fill out your aftercare summary? I think that you might want to write out what you perceive to be the issues that you are dealing with on an ongoing basis. If the doctor doesn't fill it out, you can testify as to what was going on. It's better to have it from a doctor, but if your doctor won't fill it out, then you kind of make your own notes as to what's going on. Because your testimony is evidence, and you know better than the doctor how you're feeling. And Connie says mine would be higher in terms of the choosing which account to go for. Scott H. Recently awarded after 3 months. Great. As you all can see, this can happen. Thanks for the help. My pleasure. But, Scott obviously had a serious medical issue, got approved very quickly. So it does happen. It does happen. And this is part of that initiative I've been telling you about, where in some cases, Social Security can tell the adjudicators to bypass the medical consultant and issue an approval based on what they know. And, just like when I'm looking at a case, I know right away it's a potentially a winning case. I think adjudicators are the same way. They see a case, they see the, person is 61 years old with 3 herniated discs and radiculopathy and, abnormal nerve conduction study, and, they're on Percocet and hydrocodone and Neurontin. That's a winning case. They're going to approve it. So that's what obviously what happened to Scott, which is good, what it should have happened. May I ask questions? Yes, Tommy, you may. That is me, and you are happy to answer your questions. My pleasure. Yeah, Tilo, I told you should contact Cal Heroes. So yeah, Medicare Mall. Give him a call. Luis Alvarado. How long would it generally take an LJ to make a disability determination after a supplemental hearing? Again, it could be 2-3 weeks. It could be 2 or 3 months. It just depends on the backlog. So there's no set time. There's no required amount of time, minimum or maximum. But typically 4 to 6 weeks after any hearing, initial or supplemental. Jackie's the one with the husband, has 2 MRIs, X-rays, vocational assessment, no transferable skills. That helps. I would make sure that assessment gets in the file. One of my cases coming up, there's a vocational assessment that my client had done as part of his VA application, a private vocational assessment. It basically says that because of pain flare-ups, he would likely miss 3 or more days of work per month. It is in the file. In my brief, I'm quoting from it. So yes, a vocational assessment is very good evidence, and I would get that in the file if it's not already there. Peter, Part 1, won my SSDI back in December after 4 years of received my award. Been in touch with my congressperson, but still nothing. Is there anything else you can do? No, you're doing everything I would tell you to do. Contact your congressperson. I personally prefer senators over representatives, but regardless, as you've got somebody to look into it. It may simply be it's just sitting on somebody's desk, and because of the backlog and people resigning, no one's looking at it. So you're doing everything you possibly can do. RD says, congratulations to Scott. Scott's the one who got approved after 3 months. RD wants to know, how old are you, Scott, and what are your impairments? And again, Scott, if you wish to answer that, that's fine, but that's a good question. Deb's replying to Connie. Do Pedroza, been out of work for like a year and 9 months. Do a work injury. My doctor's giving me MMI. Can I apply? Very good question. It sounds like you got a workers' compensation case going on. I would talk to your comp lawyer about this, because sometimes when you settle a comp case, you have to agree not to file for Social Security for a period of time because you don't want Medicare to get involved. Medicare may want you to set aside some of your comp settlement. I think it's always wise to speak to your comp lawyer about possibly filing for Social Security before you do, because there may be reasons to delay. I've got a couple of cases now where I had to delay filing for like 6 or 8 months so that my client, would meet the obligations of what she agreed to in the settlement documents for workers' comp. So I would talk to your comp lawyer. I have Judge Strong. What do you think about his approval rate? Well, I'll have to look up Judge Strong's approval rate. And again, this is just one factor. Let's see what we got here. I'm looking up in the, there are different utilities I've got for this. Let me just go to this one here because I see it. Stats. That's the wrong bookmark. Please bear with me here. Let's see. Here we go. Okay. So you say you have a Judge Strong. And let's see if we can find a Judge Strong. There is a Judge Claire Strong in Montgomery, Alabama, with a very high approval rate. There's a Judge Helen Strong in Houston with an also very high approval rate. So based on what I'm seeing here, both Judge Strongs, the one in Montgomery and the one in Houston, both have well above average approval rates. Does it mean you win? No, but it certainly is better than having a judge with a 10% approval rate. So both these judges seem to have pretty good approval rates. So that looks pretty good. You don't have an attorney. Again, I would just make sure that you are prepared to talk about at your hearing the vocational issues you're dealing with. I will tell you, many attorneys, if they saw a judge with a high approval rate, would be, if they were questioning about whether to take your case, might be more willing to do so. That's quite honestly, when somebody calls me, they've already got a hearing scheduled, I'll ask them who the judge is. If it's a judge, with a really, really low approval rate, I may tell them no, because I don't want to waste my time. If it's a judge with an above average to really good approval rate, more likely to say yes, because again, I have a better chance of winning. But if you think you can do it without an attorney, more power to you. Good evening. It was approved for SSDI. Michelle says, in January, how long does it take to receive Medicare? You become eligible for Medicare 2 years after the date of your first payment. So if you're approved in January, but you were found disabled, let's say in January of 2024, January 3rd of 2024, you're not paid the first 5 months. You wouldn't be paid for January, which is partial month, February, March, April, May, June. Your first payment would be July of 24. That means Medicare kicks in 2 years later, August of 26. So it's 2 years to the date of first payment is when Medicare kicks in. T-Cash. Tell your viewers to check out with their state offers for Medicare medical coverage in Massachusetts. I'm guessing, being low income, they pay the entire $185 premium. Those pick up everything. Medicare does not. Good point, T-Cash. I had not thought about that, but yes, see if your state offers something that would get you medical insurance. for medical coverage. Thomas is 62 from Florida, major pain due to back issues, medical records from 7 years ago, uninsured. I would tell you that if you don't have an MRI or some evidence from 7 years, hard to win. You really need to have a current MRI and ongoing medical treatment, because what was going on 7 years ago is not necessarily what's going on today. You're going to need something more recent. Now, they may send you out for a consultative, but I would not rely on that. I think you have to find a way to get to a doctor, because otherwise, you're really taking a big chance. And 7 years ago, is an eternity. I mean, a lot of things can happen in 7 years ago. 7 years. MMI stands for medical improvement. Mark, my client, not many opening for, hey, Mark, for leaf tires. Not sure what you mean by that, Mark. Leaf tires. Okay. I guess that means that's a job that they come up with, vocational witnesses come up with. There's all these different unskilled jobs that they come up with. I think leaf tire was the one, Mark's case. I don't remember. I thought maybe what's going on. But how you doing, Mark? We will hopefully hear something soon. Purple Drink. DDS caseworker told me she needed my sleep study. She could decide my case immediately. It's always good to get a decision. Even if it's denials, you can move on. It seems odd to me because sleep studies normally don't make the difference. Maybe there's some issue of non-restorative sleep. Maybe it's about getting the file completed. Maybe he's looking for the rare situations where, poor sleep or sleep issues are the determining factor. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's good to get a decision. I'll leave it at that. But I don't think that sleep study is going to move the meter. Okay. Vince has lived in Michigan, Traverse City. I will be there in July. They have the Cherry Festival. I like cherries, so that's a good thing. They're anti-inflammatory, by the way. So yeah, hopefully I will we'll have a good time. We're not going to be there that long, but like I said, my good friends, who by the way is having a knee replacement this week, and he's doing it early so he can be ready for to walk his daughter down the aisle in July. But his daughter's fiance is from that part from Traverse City. They live in the engaged couple lives in Colorado, and although the young lady is from Atlanta, they're going to do it in Traverse City. So we're looking forward to it. It's something a little different. I've never been out there, but I've heard from more than a few people that it's really pretty. So Alicia says to Madeline, hello. And that is how Madeline spells her name, by the way. It's not misspelled. There's no E on it. I'm sure her whole life people have been spelling Madeline with an E, but there's no E on it. Stargirl says, I noticed that neurologists or neurosurgeons are hesitant to support SSDI for chronic intractable migraines. I guess neurologist. What advice do you have to claim to get support of a neuro? I'm on my third one now. I have the support of a rheumatologist. I think, sometimes the medical record can say enough. And realize with migraines, it's very hard for a neurologist to say definitively, that you have level 10 migraines 3 days a week. It's all based on what you report. I would have a headache diary for certain, but the reason you may have trouble is because it's inherently subjective. I mean, you can't take an MRI of a migraine. So, if you have an orthopedist and there's an MRI that shows herniated disc at L5S1 with your nerve compression and you're complaining of numbness in your leg and severe back pain, the doctor can say, the complaints are consistent with the objective evidence and I believe it. And so I'm going to fill out this functional capacity evaluation and give my opinion about how long a person can sit, stand, walk, lift, carry, et cetera, et cetera. A neurologist is based on what my client is telling me she had a severe migraine headache and she's having them 4 times a week. And the medicines I'm giving her are not helping. It's all subjective. So, many times doctors who are dealing with subjective medical issues are going to be more hesitant to fill out a functional form because they don't know. I mean, they don't know, do you have an unusually high or low pain threshold? Nobody knows. So that may be what's going on. So I think that the evidence that I use in migraine cases is frequency of treatment, the willingness to try multiple different kind of medications, everything from Botox to Topamax to all the different meds that you try, your headache diary. And, if you keep going to the doctor and there's no evidence of malingering, you sort of draw an inference that you've got a significant problem. I mentioned this before. I had a case out of Texas, which can be hard to win. Texas judges tend to be a little more cynical. Woman was a nurse, and she was, I think, in her 30s or 40s, and kept having these terrible migraine headaches. And so, she left a career she loved and had worked all her life to be in, and was going to doctor after doctor, headache clinics, took Botox, took all these different medications, and nothing really helped. She was still having them. And the judge accepted it. The judge believed her. And it's like, she even said, she goes, this is miserable for me. I can't, drive to see my grandchildren, my kids, or whatever it was, grandchildren, or nieces or nephews. And, I can't work. This is all I wanted to do my whole life, was to be an emergency room nurse. I can't do that. I've gone to these doctors. I've had the Botox, which is painful. I've tried all these medications with side effects, and nothing is helping. I really want to get better. And she came across as being very believable. I proved it. So that's, that's the way you do it. You have to kind of come at it sort of circumstantially, but it can work. How do you locate the center? Just type in, Ted Cruz is one of them. Just type in to Google Texas senators, U.S. senators from Texas. It'll give you the name, and it'll give you the a link to their website. You'll see on there, how to contact the senator about a federal agency, and that's what you do. They're all pretty much the same. But yeah, just type in senator from Texas. John Ball says, a child just turned 18 struggling with Asperger's, ADHD, agoraphobia, depression, anxiety, extreme demand avoidance syndrome, has personal family trauma. Can he qualify? Maybe. Again, I think that those issues are pretty significant. If he's under the care of a psychologist and or psychiatrist who can document what he's going through and can talk about the medications that have been tried, the therapy that's been tried, it's certainly possible. Obviously, if he's not had a work record, it will be SSI only. If it's a disabled adult child, I think he's got to be 21 to get that. But for an SSI case, this is not atypical of what would qualify for SSI. It's just you have the documentation for it. But, on its face, if those conditions and those issues are well documented, I think that's a winning case. But again, it would probably be SSI only, because I'm guessing he has no earnings record. Shauna says, hello, Shauna Ham. Wayne says, thank you, my pleasure, Wayne. Crisp, 1991. Hello, Crisp. Sarah D is back. Yes, keep a sleep log. Good. I'm young. I've been working for the past 24 years. And that does help. Judges do respect people who've got a long work history. Their sense is, and look, if I was a judge, I would think it this way. Why would somebody who's worked for 25 years suddenly stop to sit at home for 2 years hoping to win Social Security? And if you've got a long work history, that shows you're motivated to work. That being said, I don't know what pressure is being put on these judges to limit approvals to people that are older, but be that as it may, I think the things you've got going on are pretty significant. How do you ask questions? Just type it, just like you just did. Tom, you just asked me a question, so just type it in the way you just did. And just like it says, how to ask questions, ask your question. Okay, Stacy Stewart. On mental health SSDI, I have a team of doctors and concerning neuropsych test results, getting MRI, no suggested meds yet, or you need to take them to keep SSDI. No, not necessarily. Again, some mental health cases respond to medications, others respond to talk therapy. That being said, it is true that a mental health case where you're on psychotropic medications, Social Security will tend to see that as being more serious because you're being medicated. That being said, you're 59. You're not on the top of the list to be reviewed. And taking psychotropic medications, is not the healthiest thing in the world for you. It's not great to do. So I wouldn't take them simply because you're trying to keep your Social Security. If they've not tried to review you at this point, they probably are not. I've got a couple of clients who have treatment-resistant depression. Medicines don't help them. So they don't take medicines. So, or they take very limited medications. So that is not the only way to do it. I mean, yes, it does send a message to Social Security. You're on, this medication. You're on Prozac. You're on, whatever the medication may be. And that does send a message, but it's not absolutely essential. John Zima says, my partner applies for fall for SSDI, but a functional capacity theory of disability. Okay, that's good. She has a few conditions taken together, severely limited ability to work. One is migraines, but her neurologist does not provide medical source statements. Okay. And again, as I talked about, migraines, you may have trouble with that because it's not something that the doctor can say for certainty. I understand that adjudicators value statements of specialists or primary providers. In this case would be withdrawal obtaining a statement from a primary. Yes, it would. I think that would be, again, think of this as a big puzzle. That is a piece of the puzzle. A headache log would be another piece of the puzzle. Evidence of treatments that you've taken would be another piece of the puzzle. So, yeah, if you can't get it from a specialist, get it from a GP. It certainly does not hurt and would probably help. And that's really, by the way, the functional capacity, that's the only theory you can really use. You can't really use the grid rules because it's not physical, and you probably don't meet a listing, or should probably don't meet a listing. So the functional capacity, but I think knowing that and discussing it in terms of analyzing her medical issues in terms of vocational limitations is a very smart thing to do. That's a good way to look at it, and that really will go a long way to help you make a very clear, concise argument. Muley. So Muley appealed the onset date. I think you said last week that you got approved, but they changed the onset date to very recently. Sent back to local officer checking my non-medical again. What does that mean? 15 days. Reconsideration. Again, it just means that somebody's looking at it, whether it's the medical or the non-medical part. Maybe they back down and approve you based on your original onset date. I don't know. But anytime Social Security says they're reviewing something, they're looking at it for a reason. We don't always know the reason. It could be something very simple. It could be they're willing to approve you using your original onset date. We just don't know. But I don't think it's a bad thing if you're going to get a decision quickly. Joe Minnick is MS. I'm 47. They review my kids for 6 years. Haven't been to the doctor in a few years. How likely is them to approve me? Again, I'm not sure, Joe, if you are applying for a new application or a CDR. I think with MS, because it does have, most of the time, it will have plateaus and then declines. You haven't been to the doctor in 6 years, in a few years, didn't say 6 years. I think it would be worthwhile to go to the doctor, just to find out what's going on, where you're at. And you may know how you feel, but it's really hard to win Social Security when you have no doctor support or no statements. So for Social Security purposes alone, notwithstanding the need that you should go to the doctor to see what's going on with you, I think that would be an essential if you want to win Social Security, to have a more recent medical statement. Goddess of Love. Rheumatologist, this is the person who's got a hearing coming up with a high approval judge. Rheumatologist diagnosed with subcutaneous lupus, unusual, seronegative RA, which basically means that it's rheumatoid arthritis, but it's not coming up in the blood test. So Sjogren's syndrome, compression root disorder, L4-5, doctor wants to go to physical therapy. So, you've got a lot of stuff going on here. Is it enough for a judge to decide that you would not be able to perform any kind of work? Maybe, again, I don't recall if you said you've got an MRI that shows, the compression root issue, but that may be enough. The things that are objective are going to really help you more. The lupus and the seronegative RA, not going to help you as much. The compression root disorder is more objective. That would be what I'd focus on. And it might make it easier for a judge to find a reason to approve you. Okay, so the attorney never spoke to me again in wartime, didn't take my back pay, never talked to me again. Again, if you signed a contract that says your attorney is entitled to 25% of your past due benefits with a cap at the time of $6,000, and your case was approved, he's earned his fee. Social Security, when you take a contingency fee, when an attorney takes a case under a contingency, most of the time, the attorney does work that supports, that fee. Sometimes, it may be simply filling out an application correctly. I've had cases where I filled out an application, I referenced the grid rules or listings, made an argument, got approved. Would that case have gotten approved without that? Probably not. Did I earn my fee? Yes. Does somebody think I shouldn't be paid $6,000 or $3,000? Usually, if it's approved early, there's not that much money involved. But let's say it was $1,500. Was it worth it? In my opinion, yes. Some people say no. Now, when you get a decision, a favorable award, it'll say on there you have a certain number of days to challenge the fee, to write the chief judge to say why your attorney should not have gotten the fee. The fact that he didn't talk to you, maybe he did it all in writing. Maybe the attorney did what he needed to do to win your case, in which case he earned his fee. So, it's not like it's one thing if you hired an attorney to win a disability case and you won the case, never talked to you, didn't feel like he did anything, got his fee, you signed the contract. Okay, maybe you write the chief judge to say he should be paid less because he didn't do very much, although you don't know what he really did necessarily. But okay, I can get that. But if it's something different, if somebody takes $6,000 to do a will and an estate plan, doesn't do it and then retires, that's a whole different story. So, the fact that he didn't talk to you doesn't mean he didn't do anything. So just I don't get out. I'm starting to see that I don't see there's an ethical issue there. Just my opinion. But of course, I would try to talk to the attorney to say, ask him what he did. But again, you signed a contract. And if you signed it and he fulfilled his term, his part of it, then he's entitled to his fee. John Ball is the person with the younger relative, I think, who has significant mental health problems. And Deb says, school records, and that could be also part of this as well. That's a good point. School records with an IEP or individualized education plan. That could be very helpful as well. But it's always hard when you deal with young people because Social Security tends to look really closly at those. In South Dakota, it's ice, snow, tundra here. Okay. Melissa Herrera, how do attorneys get paid for SSI cases? Attorneys get paid the same things, 25% of past due benefits. The problem, and it's capped. Now the cap is $9,200. At one point it was $6,000, went to $7,200. Now it's $9,200 over like a 15-year period. How attorneys get paid, same way. The problem is SSI, the past due benefits are going to be lower. Because when you take past due benefits for SSI, it's not a year prior to application, it's only as of the date of application. So it's less time for those past due benefits to accrue. Secondly, the maximum SSI payments like just over $1,000 a month. If your SSDI is $3,000 a month, obviously, it doesn't take very long to get the fee a good bit higher. If your SSI is reduced because of support from family and friends and things like that, it's let's say $300 a month. Let's say the $300 times 2 years, 24 months times $300, 24 times 300 is $7,200. 25% of that is $1,800, versus, $8,000 or $9,000 for a similar case on SSDI. Some attorneys look at it and say it's not worth the money. Other attorneys, and I know some of them, are happy to do it. They don't. It's more about can they win. It's just going to depend. I'll take SSI cases, but if I see there's going to be a big offset, I may not do it. If it looks like it's a case that's going to get approved really quickly, I may do that as a pro bono. Just saying I'm not going to get paid. I got one right now with a young man who is a quadriplegic. He's going to get approved. I'm probably not going to get paid, but I'm happy to help him. I think most attorneys do a little bit of that. It just depends. Let's put it this way, though. I couldn't stay in business and cover my overhead if I'm getting fees of $1,500, $1,800 for the 2 or 3 years work it takes to get a Social Security case approved. I'm depending on those $6,000 and $7,000 fees because just it costs money to run a practice. So, and that may be the issue you're running into, is that many attorneys don't want to take SSI cases. I'm real selective about them. It's just this. I have to be crass. There's just not enough money in them, and with the offsets, and plus, people with SSI usually don't have a work history. Again, that makes it more difficult. Judges prefer people with long work histories. So, it's just any number of reasons, but that's just the truth. Okay. Yeah, again, a South Dakota girl. I don't want to get into it all. You're 40, you're 44, and you won. All I can say is the important thing is you won. What the attorney did, if the attorney didn't do a good job communicating with you, that's on him. There's a big difference between poor communication and winning and ethical issues. It sounds like you didn't file a bar complaint, but I guess I would sort of tell you there's probably not much you can do about it at this point. Just kind of move on. All motor, my big box representative left me after I got a second hearing. Yeah, that happens sometimes. And what he's getting at is that there are some large firms, disability advocate firms that have, 25, 30 attorneys, do thousands of cases a year. And if there's a second hearing, whether it's because it's a supplemental hearing or because it was remanded, they may back out. I've taken some of those cases and won them. What is the reason? I mean, did he give you a reason for backing out? Would he, more importantly, will he withdraw and waive fees so you can get another attorney? Those are the questions I have. It just, there's a lot of things we don't know. Why did he withdraw? Would he, again, back off and waive fees? That would be helpful to know. So you're filing a complaint. Again, before you file a complaint, my advice would be find out why the attorney withdrew. Will he withdraw and waive fees? Can you get somebody else? But there may be a very good reason for it. I mean, and before you file a bar complaint, ask. Do as a matter of courtesy. This is this gentleman's. I obviously don't know him, know anything about him. Maybe he's a creep. I don't know, but don't go after his livelihood. For something unless you know the full story behind it. One of the things you learn in law school, by the way, just to get an aside, is there's always two sides to every story. One side may not be a very compelling side, but there's always another argument there, something going on. I'll give an example. I mean, I'm not suggesting this is you. I'll give an example. I had a case years ago where I was literally in the hearing office. My client admitted to me before the hearing that he was using a fake social security number, his cousin's social security number. He had come to this country illegally. He was working. His cousin was not working. He was using his cousin's social security number. And he was injured and very possibly could have won. Well, the problem is I go into the hearing and I present this guy's case, as, let's say John Smith, when in fact his name was really Steve Jones. Okay. I'm committing a fraud on the court. Can't do that because I know. But I also can't tell the judge, because I can't breach of confidence. I can't tell the judge, well, the reason why I'm withdrawing is there is there is an identity fraud thing going on here. You're being misled. So all we can do as attorneys would be to say, Judge, there are some issues that have arisen that make it impossible for me to represent this individual, or something to that effect. Whether my client and I have reached an impasse about something that is not irreconcilable, that has to be resolved. Most judges will pick up what you mean, that your client has told you a huge lie or has misrepresented something or has faked evidence or something like that. They're not going to try to ask you about it. Because no attorney is going to wait to the last minute and back out unless there's a pretty darn good reason for it. I just say that because we don't know why this attorney withdrew. And the other thing is, if there's no pending hearing in Social Security, it's administrative, he can do that. It's not illegal to do that. You're not supposed to withdraw unless there's a compelling reason while there is a hearing that's been scheduled. But if, let's say, you went to the first hearing and you get a notice that it's going to be a second hearing, but not been scheduled, that he can withdraw. He's perfectly within his rights to do so. Once that second hearing is scheduled, unless he's got a good reason, he shouldn't withdraw. Again, find out more. before you file any bar complaints, is what I would tell you. Metal might get SSI but deny SSDI. I don't know why. Usually the reason would be is that SSDI, you have to have enough earnings records. Really, most people need to have 20 quarters out of less, 20 credits out of the last 40 quarters. That's really working at more than, say $7, $8, $9, $10,000 a year for at least the last 5 years out of the last 10. If you haven't worked in 15 years, you don't have enough credits unless you can prove disabled adult child or widow's benefits, something like that. You're not going to qualify non-medically for SSDI. So it's the same standard of disability, same definition. It's just you probably don't have enough credits. That's why you didn't qualify for SSDI. I might ask your attorney. That'd be my guess. Melissa says, if a primary care doctor is hostile toward a disabled patient, just plain mean, is this grounds for a lawsuit? No. No. Again, medical malpractice is beyond what I do, but there has to be some sort of harmful error. And being rude and nasty is bad customer service, but that's not medical error. If he gave you a prescription that was 5 times too much and it caused damage to your liver, that's one thing. That's potentially malpractice. The fact that he, insulted you and yelled at you, no, that's not malpractice. No lawsuit there. Okay, and Deb also points out, because Metal Mike says only got SSI and SSDI. Could be you don't qualify. The other thing is your date lapse insured, which is also the part of the SSDI, where you had enough credits, it may be expired, 3 or 4 years ago, and you were found disabled after your date lapse insured. That could be it too, but that just also means not qualifying. Madeline says hello to Alicia. Billy Magro, Mr. Ginsberg, you don't need to call me Mr. Ginsberg. Jonathan is fine, please. My questions were: I received my first SSDI in September. I was found out disability in February. Received funding. You don't receive money the first 5 full months. So if you're found disabled February 3rd, okay, you don't get paid for February because it's partial month. I know, it's the way it is. You don't get paid for March, April, May, June, July. You get paid. First payment would be in August. And I don't know why September, unless you're getting paid in September for August. But, if you're, that's why, by the way, if you're applying for disability, you can choose the first of the month, July 1 versus July 2. Choose July 1, because that way you don't have that partial month that eats up one of your, that doesn't count towards your 5-month waiting period. So like when I'm doing an application for somebody, I say, when did you become disabled? And they left their job, let's say, April 3rd. My question to them was, well, were you having a lot of trouble the last week in March, where April you really didn't do the job, you just kind of came in and gave your resignation? Well, yeah, well then my onset date is going to be March 30th, not April 3rd, because April 3rd means that's one less month the person gets disability benefits. Just something, if you can do it, you should always try to do that. Purple drink. Reminds me when I was in school, I was in New Orleans. I went to Tulane, and there was a famous bar down there. And I'm not a drinker, by the way. I very rarely drink alcohol. Just doesn't do anything for me. I don't have anything against it. I just don't really drink. But there was a bar down there called Pat O'Brien's, a very famous bar. And they have this big thing. It used to, I don't know if they still do. It was called a Hurricane. And it's like this red, fruity punch, with a lot of rum in it. And they had this other thing called a Magnum you would get that would be like this thing that would be, like 4 foot high. And you'd have these huge straws. You'd go there with all these people, in a fraternity or whatever. And there'd be 30 people kind of sucking down this nasty, overly sweet, Hurricane full of rum. But there was also, so my point is that was just like disgusting, because it was, first of all, you got all these other people backwashing into your drink, which don't get me started on that. And it just was terrible. It's just nasty. So there was a drink they had called a Purple People Eater, and it was sweet-ish, but at least it was, drinkable. So when I'd go to Pat O'Brien's, that would be, if I was going to drink anything, I would get a Purple People Eater and nurse it for, 4 hours while my fraternity brothers will run around making idiots of themselves. So anyway, purple drink. That just got me thinking about that. Hadn't thought about a purple people eater in I don't know how long, but that was my first thought. So anyway, here nor there. And I don't want anybody to think that I'm, out there looking to go to bars because like I said, too old for that. Never really did anyway. The way the DDS caseworker talked to me, should we decide my case without medical review under the new program? Great, that's good. Usually a good sign because it means they're gonna approve it. Because if they're gonna do it under the new program, they typically are gonna approve it. That's usually what the program. That's what the program says. They can decide cases if they're going to grant fully favorable. So that is a good sign. I don't think they can deny it without looking at the medical, is my point. Only approvals, having a medical specialist looking at it. Digital hippie. I'm 43. I've had one laminectomy, which is back surgery. A second was canceled. An EMG shows nerve damage. My psych has me on ketamine for major depression. Ketamine is a very, very powerful medication, kind of one of the last resort. It was like an anesthetic that they found it had antidepressant qualities. Second hearing of the ALJ. Does the EMG make a case look promising? Again, yes, you've had surgery. You need a second one, and EMG is positive, but you're 43. So you got some really, really strong stuff. You're on ketamine. You got some exertional problems, really bad back. You got non-exertional issues, serious level of depression, but you're 43. So, good medical, but you're 43. So I can put this. Some judges, they don't care what's wrong with you. You're 43. Others are going to say, I don't approve a lot of people under 50, but the few, that I might approve, and digital hippie is one of them. So it's just going to depend on the judge you get. Blue Pedrosa says, I do not have a lawyer. I'm not sure, Blue Pedrosa. I don't remember the question you asked. I'm sorry, because it was back up here. Here we go. Been out of work for the work injury. He says you were out of work for like a year and 9 months. Due to a work injury, and doctors gave me MMI. Can I apply for disability? Again, I think that you would talk to your comp lawyer first about whether you should do it or not at all. The second thing is, if your comp case is not settled, and you're still getting weekly benefit payments, then that's going to offset your Social Security. So once you settle the case, you can have language in it that basically pays you the settlement. It treats it as it was paid over your expected lifespan. But as long as you're getting ongoing benefits and offset Social Security dollar for dollar, you will not find a lawyer to take your case because there's no past due benefits because all the money is being offset. So it really kind of depends on when you settled your case and what the settlement offset would be. Kimberly Shelton, my SSD back pay is at the payment center past 2 weeks, whichever time it's deposited. It should be around now. Should be you're getting your monthly payments. So that's going through. You should get the next week or so. Yep. Okay. Thomas Helgett. I've got a case with him coming up, I believe. 52%. Yeah, 52% is about, average is about 49, 50%, 52%. Let me see if I got something different for him on this. There's different. I show him as 53%. So, I think it just depends on, and 53% in Houston, and he was 50% in Little Rock. So, he's right at the high end of average, which is fine. I can live with that. That'll get you a fair hearing. So, yeah. In fact, I saw him because I've got him coming up with a couple of cases, and I had a teacher when I was in high school, Mrs. Helgett. It's an unusual name. I think it's a German name. So I was going to ask him if I get a chance if he's related to my teacher. Or actually, I guess my teacher's husband, because I think she ended up getting divorced from Mr. Helgett. So I don't know. Yeah, it's an unusual name, but his approval rate's one I certainly live with. 50%, 53%. That's cool. All right, Tommy's the one who asked you to ask a question, so he did. I'm 50, being an SSDI for approximately 8 years due to major depressive disorder, anxiety, PTSD, psychosis, etc., due to tragic past events, documented of the progressive CPOD, MS diagnosis, mild symptoms. How long can I expect to continue? Yeah, I think, Tommy, I think that it's unlikely you're going to get a CDR. I mean, you've got significant issues here, both exertional, medical, mental health, and assuming these things are all well documented, um, my guess is your file will not be one that's coded for a CDR. I don't think that yours is a case they're going to look to try to reverse. I just think that these things are permanent. You've got the MS, which is going to leave them at best stay the same, at worst get worse. COPD probably going to get worse. So I think that you're not likely to be reviewed. I really don't think it's likely to happen at all. I mean, it could, but as long as you're getting medical treatment, you should be just fine. But I don't think that this would be one you're going to get approved. I keep saying approved. You're not going to get reviewed on. Okay. Elliot says, my Social Security claim has been stuck in and out of federal quality review since February 25th. I'm wondering how much longer. You should have something, usually 2 or 3 weeks is pretty typical when it goes to those reviews. At least in my experience, I've had a couple of them. It took about 2 or 3 weeks delay. So I would tell you probably next week, end of next week, week after. There are free months that are given. I'm not sure what you're asking about. I assume that Billy knows what you're talking about because I don't know what you're getting at. But because he's the one who had found disabled in February, but didn't get his payment until September. I still think it's the waiting period there. Okay, so I think Kimberly, we already answered that. It should come pretty quickly. All right, within the next few weeks. Blue Z, good question. What approval rate do you think is high for a judge to approve? Well, I mean, on average, about 50%. So if I see a judge that's 62%, that's a really good sign. I see him as high as 75, occasionally even higher than that. You don't see him too much higher than 70%. That's pretty unusual. When Society tries to weed them out, they go after the high pay judges first, and they'll weed out the ones that are paying 85 or 90%. They won't weed out the ones paying 12%, but they will weed out the ones paying 85%. So I would say the highest I typically see would be, high 60s, maybe low 70s. And many of those judges have been around for a really long time, probably have some political pull that keeps them on the bench, or they figure they're going to be retiring soon. But I'd say 65% is sort of on the high end for a judge who's not, someone with a lot of seniority. Again, Elliot, I think that's not uncommon. I think there are some cases plucked at random for review, others because of the underlying medical issue or something that the computer algorithm picked up in the record. But I would say within a couple of weeks, you should have your answer. Hopefully it will be like the 2 I've had recently, just they were delayed for a couple of weeks and they got paid. Dakota Girl, my pleasure, Dakota Girl, and I'm happy to see you here. Thank you for your questions. So you had cerebral ataxia, brain issues, essential tremors. Again, these are things that are probably well documented. I mean, probably an MRI of the brain. So this doesn't seem to me like one that would be really subjective that they would want to review. It simply may be that the way the judge wrote up the decision needs to be reviewed. It could be anything, but my guess would be you won't have a problem. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, so this is All Motors, the one whose lawyer backed out after the first hearing. CD and MRI, they're going to do a spinal cord stimulator. A second lawyer in the hearing was at 5-1. Anything else can I do? I mean, I think I'll probably rely on your second lawyer who's looked at the file. Having the CT and MRI scans is helpful because that's objective evidence. Anytime you have a spinal cord stimulator being suggested, it says that your pain level is not being properly addressed by conservative treatment. That's a good sign for disability. So, you got a second lawyer to take your case. Those are all positive signs, in my opinion. My pleasure, goddess of love. I hope things work out for you. Oscar says, I'm out of the country waiting for courts. Probably your question is it okay to be out of the country? I would just make sure you have somebody who can get your mail so you know if something's going on. Elliot says, I reached out to Cory Booker's office, Steve Smith, as well as Trump. Nobody's pushing this along, so he has to go through the system. Well, Cory Booker was busy yesterday giving a 24-hour speech, so he's probably resting at this point. And I don't think Mr. Trump's going to do too much about it. Steve, I think you're doing what you can do. I don't think there's anything I think it's going to go through the quality control. They're going to look at it. I know it's frustrating as all get out because you just want your case over and your money, and you're like 98% there. Then all of a sudden, we're going to do quality review. Give it a week or two. I think it'll be fine. That's my take. Okay. Goddess who loves sings. Purple Drink had the same issue with DDS. She denied it and filed reconsider. Yes. Okay. Stargirl. Woman in Texas with headaches says similar to me except multiple comorbidities. Leave my teaching career of 10 years after melting hostility. So yes, absolutely. You can prove disability circumstantially by, if it's subjective, just by the seriousness you take it, the procedures you undergo, your willingness to undergo uncomfortable, painful procedures, ones that make you sick, the ones that cause physical pain. You've had a career. I mean, teaching is a calling, just like nursing is a calling. People don't leave that just for no reason. So, yeah, I think that, those are all things that definitely work in your favor. Yeah, Tom, it looks like I see your comment like 4 or 5 times, so maybe there's a delay in getting it posted, but that's okay. I hope I answered your question. Tara says, thank you. You're welcome, Tara. And Stargirl's MRA that shows hypoplasia of A1 segment of fetal origin, which reassuring. Okay, and again, this is an example. What Stargirl is talking about is there can be MRI of the brain that show abnormalities that have been associated with headaches. Not so sure there's a direct cause and effect, but that is an argument. And certainly your lawyer can make the argument and present literature. And I've done this. You just get the National Institute of Health literature. You find it, that there is a linkage between this brain malformation and migraine headaches. That may be enough to push it over the edge, in addition to all your efforts to deal with it. Like I said, the Botox and the Topamax and the prophylactics and the other ones, and the headache diary, all that stuff together. Now you've got some MRI evidence showing there may be some organic cause. Makes your case that much stronger. So I think that sounds pretty strong. Okay, Oscar says, waiting courting, can you say more? Can I go? In fact, I've had cases. I had a hearing. My client was in Vietnam. A really nice guy. We had a really interesting conversation. He was telling me about Vietnam from the States, but he was like, it's like it costs a third to live there. And so I remember we had a hearing. It was 8:00 in the morning for me. It was 8 p.m. at night for him, and he got approved. And he was in Vietnam. I've had people in, any number of different countries. You can do it from any place. And again, the judge would ask, tell me about the travel over there. Was it, you go back and forth, or why are you there? And again, many times it's because the cost of living is a lot cheaper. So yeah, you can in fact, even at the DDS level, at the administrative level, there is an office. I've got a case right now with a guy who moved out of the country. There's an international, state agency, as it were, adjudication office for the initial recon level. So they are set up to handle international cases. Hearings will be done by phone or video, obviously, but they are set up to handle that. So not a problem at all to move overseas, but be prepared to explain why you did it, and also the procedure of getting over it. And as long as it was something where you're not going back 15 times, because travel, especially if you're saying you've got a back problem and you went back and forth 15 times on a, 9 or 10 hour flight, you got to be able to explain that. But I think all in all, it's not a big deal. Laurie Schroeder. Finally, after 7 years, I was fully favorable. Great, Laurie. My videos provide so much information. Great. Started at 45, be 53, waiting for a letter. Well, my pleasure, Laurie. Well, now that you mention it, thank you for your very, very thoughtful words. If you got a benefit out of it, leave me a review. Go to jonathanginsberg.com. You'll see leave a review for Jonathan, or here's on the crawl I just put. If you're enjoying the live stream, leave me a nice review. If you got benefit from the videos or from the live stream, always like to get, that's one. I'll be frank with you. Is in this environment now, lawyers. It used to be you knew somebody who knew somebody who knew a lawyer. Now it's mostly online. So, I try to share what I know using videos and podcasts and articles and things like that. But, the currency to get new cases and to get, a good reputation is online reviews. So if any of you are finding this useful and are inclined to do so, please leave me a positive review. I would really appreciate it. Melissa says, is the person who calls me about consultative appointments the person making the initial decision? Possibly. I mean, it depends on their staffing. They may have, I know a lot of times they do it by like automated call. But you may get a call from an adjudicator, you may get a call from somebody in the office, but it could be the adjudicator, it could be the decision maker. Not always, but it could be. I know sometimes I get calls from the adjudicators saying, can we contact your client, or can I contact your client? So they will do that. Other times it will be the adjudicator just, has somebody in the office, that's working there. That's their job, is to call and remind people of the consultatives, but it very well could be. RD is 56, has had several bladder surgeries, now small capacity bladder urgency, obviously pelvic pain, bladder pain, got done with rotator cuff. Do you have a good case? Yes, you have a good case. I will tell you, I win a ton of cases on bowel and bladder problems. Frequency. I got a case coming up, next couple of days. I'm not sure it's tomorrow or Friday. Client has really bad diabetes. And because of the diabetes, has to urinate frequently. Another case we're coming up with is a guy had terrible heart attack. He's on diuretics, 2 different diuretics. Diuretics make him urinate, constant urination. So, you're having to use the restroom, take an unscheduled break every 30 minutes. That is a strong case, very strong case. So yes, absolutely. Melissa, who makes the initial decision regarding applicant qualifies for disabled? Well, initially, you file your application, it goes to the Social Security, send it to an agency of the state where you live in, or the international office, depending if you're international or not. And you have somebody called a claims specialist or adjudicator, who's kind of like an insurance claims manager. And what they're supposed to do is gather medical information, run it by a medical specialist. They have like on-staff doctors who review, although parentheses, under the new program, in some cases, they don't have to do that if it's going to be fully favorable and the person has a lot of training. But assuming they do that, it comes back to the adjudicator, who puts it all together and says, based on my training and what I'm seeing here, I'm prepared to issue a favorable decision. Many cases are denied that eventually get approved at hearing. So the adjudicators are looking for very, very serious things. They're not given a lot of authority to make a lot of judgment calls. So it's really going to be more of, something that's really, really obvious, but that's who's making those initial decisions. RD was a hairdresser, had to medically retire. And again, if you've got RD, I mean, when I see people that have bladder issues and pain, in the abdomen area, those are usually cases. I look at those, I'm like, that's a case I would want, because those I can win. Because I can make a pretty compelling argument that there is a functional issue with having to use the restroom multiple times, a day. Traverse City. Okay, Tommy tells me Traverse City in July is great. Excellent. Well, I'm kind of an amateur photographer. You can tell I like video, but I've got a bunch of cameras as well, and I love taking pictures. I take, as you all know, I play tennis, and so I'm sort of the unofficial team tennis photographer. So when I'm not playing, I'm taking pictures of my teammates, and I've won some contests for that. But I love taking pictures, so I'm going to definitely take one of my cameras to Michigan, and hopefully I have a chance to do a little sightseeing and get some nice pictures up there. I'm gonna have to one of these days. I'm gonna have to put some of my better pictures on SmugMug, which is where I put them, and I'll share with everybody. You can see, you guys can see some of my pictures because I really do have a good time with it. And like anything else, you do it enough, you start to get an eye for it. So I have a good time with it. I can't draw or sing or anything like that. So my creative outlet is I write a little bit and taking pictures. So I'll share those at some point in the near future. Okay, we've got time for just a couple more. We've got 5 minutes left. Stacy Stewart says, thanks for answering my question. Took benzos and SSRIs serious for tens of years. Didn't get better or worse. Partial memory loss. Yeah, and I absolutely understand that. I mean, I think that, the long-term effects of some of these medications can be disabling, and that can be a real important part of your case. And I've had cases that I've won because the person just, I remember I had one case that goes back years. The person had been on Xanax for like 10 years and literally could not formulate a thought. It just, maybe over time it got out of her system, but, it was just could not, formulate a thought. And the psychological evaluation was like, this person, would be too slow at any kind of job to really be functional. And we won. Do attorneys always get paid? Actually, the new fee cap is $9,200. No, you don't always get paid the full amount. I mean, I have cases where I've gotten paid $1,000 or $1,500 if it's paid early, or even cases where I've gotten, the past due benefits weren't that great. I got $4,500 or $3,500. I've also gotten cases where I've gotten $9,000 or $7,000. So that's the standard fee agreement. If you want to look it up, it's Social Security Form 1693, and it's the official form that they gave us. That's a no fee unless you win contingency. I use the official form, and that's what it provides. So I don't use my own form anymore. I just use their form, and that's what they've authorized. Social Security, again, contingency does not mean free. I want to make that clear. It means we will get paid if we win, but we risk not winning. So I've got cases that, like I mentioned, judge 12%, probably not going to get approved. Maybe I win it eventually in appeal, but it won't be for, probably a couple more years. I've got cases that I've gotten, I had a case just recently. The judge approved the case, but changed the onset date, no past due benefits, no fee. So contingency means we're taking a risk. And when you take a risk, you get compensated for it. So Social Security has decided that the appropriate compensation is up to $9,200. By contrast, I would point out that, other personal injury, there's no cap. Workers' comp, there's at least in Georgia, 25% with no cap. Every state's going to be a little bit different, but that's what they do. And I don't apologize for getting paid for what I do. And I use their form. So that's how it works. Average payment for SSD, the maximum is going to be like $3,500. I would tell you my experience is I usually see about $2,200 to $2,500 as the monthly payment is kind of the average that I see. Some a little less, some a little more, but $2,500. That's for people who typically have earned in the $50,000, $60,000 range. People that have earned a lot more than that are going to be higher. If they've earned lower, it's going to be lower. But if you're in the $50,000, $60,000 range, $2,400, $2,500 pretty typical. Is $1,069 a low amount? Probably in the low end. Yeah. Again, it's going to be a function of what you earned, and if your earnings were in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, that's probably why your monthly payment is kind of in that range. Would be my guess. John has got the 19-year-old, I think, with all the psychological issues. It's got to be heartbreaking. And again, having children myself and now a grandchild, you realize how thankful you are when everybody's healthy. Having friends who have children with special needs, how much of a struggle it can be, and not just for the parent, obviously for the child. They obviously know they're not where they should be, and you hope they can find meaning in their life and a occupation they can do, and get themselves to the point where they'll be able to function happily in life. But I know it's got to be very, very difficult. My attorney's cancer-free, did nothing for me, didn't call me anything auction continuously. For your nothing, my claim lady says, don't know what your claim lady says. Again, I realize we're running out of time. I hesitate when people say attorney's done nothing. Before you say that, ask, because there are things like in my office, we will be having calls being made, we're submitting documents, downloading things from portals. A lot of this is going on behind the scenes. Adjudicators are calling me, I'm talking to them. You just never know. And so before you say nothing's being done, just ask. That's all I tell you. Okay. Melissa says, and I got time for a couple more here. Initial phone everyone to apply for DAC, disabled adult child, was SSI. It wouldn't let me subbounce it as to 18. In process, you can appeal that. You could reapply as well. Disabled adult child is hard road to go, but I don't know why they wouldn't take the application. You can certainly do that. I would try to appeal it and see what happens, but it's tough. I'd find someone who does that. I don't do. I've done a couple of them over the years. I don't really do enough to really be, really up to speed on it. There are a couple of attorneys who really do a lot of disabled adult child cases. I would talk to one of them. Try to find somebody who does a lot of that, because it's sort of its own little area here. Okay, and so Brian Harris says 1100. Again, you approved 89, so it's a while back. But again, I can see that would be the case in 89. Okay, all right, I'm going to take two more of these. Diogenes the second says, if I have a physical condition that causes a mental condition, is a mental equally in its own winnable if written convincingly by a mental health counselor? It can be. And again, if you have a physical condition that causes severe anxiety or depression, you could certainly argue that on its own, independent of the physical problem, is disabling if you have support from your mental health professional. Yes, it's kind of rare, but it could happen, certainly. I mentioned reviews. You've had two. Yeah, sometimes they'll review you. And sometimes it just seems like they review the same people over and over for some reason. Not really sure why that is. All right, we're going to ask, Peter's got a question here. I have a bad back and right knee plus neck on gabapentin, which causes GABA brain or hard focus. And my pain has subsided. I'm still in some pain. Changed my mental health pills a bit. I'll let my representatives know. His name is Peter. Again, this is all about degree. How bad is the pain? Is it enough to put you in a situation where you would not be reliable at a job? Are you grid rule eligible? Are you over 50, over 55? These are all the things that I think would be relevant. So, anytime people say to me, I've got a herniated disc, I've got a bad knee, do I win? My response is, you don't win with the diagnosis. You win based on the degree of impairment and the proof you've got of limitations in terms of working. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to make this the last one on here. I'm going to make Scott's question the last one. And I apologize to those that I didn't get to you, because like I said, I'm at the end of my 2 hours. What are my chances of getting disability? I had a back pain that comes on when I overexert myself, stay at work too long, but the doctors, they don't see anything. I'm 59. Again, without 59 helps because, again, you could meet the grid rule. But if you don't have anything showing up objectively for back pain, like an MRI, really, really hard to win. You need to have objective evidence with back pain because, just saying I'm in pain, but there's nothing on an MRI or CT that shows why, probably not going to win. So I would say you need to have something that is showing up objectively to prove back pain. Okay, we are now at 2 hours. It's really flown by. I'm trying to get a couple other people to come on, but I'm just actually a couple of attorneys I've talked to. The issue they've had is they don't have the equipment. So I'm like this: you got to have a microphone, you got to have a camera, that kind of stuff. Hopefully I'll get them on. Anyway, I appreciate everybody joining me here today, and I really, really wish you all a nice weekend, and we'll see you next week. So you all take care. Bye-bye.